Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Chilly air this morning makes me realize we are already deep in winter. So please take care of your health well. In any case, a few days ago, leaders of China, Korea, agreed to conclude Korea-China FTA. Certainly, it was a historical event for not only for Korea and China, but the whole region, if not the whole global community. For that, the media has been covering the historic event, the impacts of the potential impacts of this FTA and many other aspects of this very important agreement in Korea. This morning, we are very fortunate to have very distinguished speaker from China who will share his views and insights on this historic event and China-Korea FTA. And he will tell us how it is received by Chinese public in general, and particularly very influential scholar like Dr. Zhang. Well, Zhang Yuling was with us at this very forum a few years ago, and he is one of the most influential academics in Chinese policymaking circle. I know he is directly and indirectly engaged in the Chinese policy, economic policy making process in his consultative capacities in most cases. He is currently with the Chinese Academy of Social Science, which is known as CAS. He just told me that there are about 3,000 researchers, of course, including retired the senior researchers. 2,000 researchers there, but Mr. Zhang is, I mean 10,000, 20,000 people there. So that's the Chinese scale. Yes. And he has been with this cast many years, and he's one of very leading scholar there, and he headed he was director of Institute of Asia Pacific Studies, and also he was director of Institute of Japanese Studies. It's very interesting to know how he see the China-Japan relations and three-country relations in the process of his talk this morning. And he is also member of National Committee of Chinese People's Political Consultative Conferences. I think it is known as Zheninde. It's a very important national political body. So he was awarded in various the medals of honors and so forth. And as an academic, he has written many books and many articles in professional journals. He has a long list of publications, but a couple of the books attracted my eyes as the changing relations between China, U.S., and Japan. And then stability and security of social economic development in East Asia. And many others, but again, caught my eyes as emerging East Asian regionalism, trend, and responses. So this morning, he will share with us his views on FTA within the context of Chinese new national growth strategy. It'll be very, very interesting. Also, I'm very fortunate, pleased to have him here this morning. Actually, we arranged this very, very abruptly, but I'm so glad many of you came and to share his views. And before I introduce him, I have to recognize all of you here present, but I just, because of time constraint, I want to just recognize only a few. First of all, this one of the star global CEOs, Chairman Yoon, is actually, he doesn't attend this meeting very often. He is chairman of FILA, and he is really global trotter, and he doesn't stay in Korea long enough, but this morning he attended here. Most importantly, he is a board member, one of the board members of IGE, his most important job he has. And then we have National Assembly, Mr. Lee. He is a young political rising star. And then we have ambassador from Brazil and Indonesia. And then Ambassador Park Sang-gi, who is a Korean ambassador to Geneva. And welcome, and many others. But with this, please forgive me not to recognize everyone. Well, with this, please join me in thanking. Yeah, Indonesia and Brazil, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure, invited by Dr. Sakong. This is my second time to be here to give a breakfast lecture. It's really a sudden request. My flight originally is on 9 o'clock, so asked me to reschedule my travel. So I think its relation with Korea is really, I feel very close, not just geographically close, but also personal. I didn't expect that there are so many close relations with Korea. And 5 years ago, I was nominated the chairperson, chair the joint expert commission created by President Lee Myung-ba and Hu Jintao. So work on bilateral relations, and now I'm also the vice president of China-Korea Friendship Association. But in China, I was considered to be a ASEAN man because I initiated this China-ASEAN FTA. I chaired the expert group and so on. But yesterday we had one conference here, one-day conference, that is CJK Cooperation Dialogue. I think probably now is the time to promote this trilateral cooperation, which is so important. But today, I will focus two things. One, that is about Chinese economy and Chinese strategy. That with this new group of leaders and how to assess that situation, and then come briefly about the China-Korea FTA just signed. Now we have a new word. Now, that is, we call the new normal situation in China economically. Why called the new normal? That is, normal in the past is high growth rate. It's about 9, 8, at least 8. So people could accept 8 at the bottom, but now turn to the new stage. That is about 7 o'clock. 7 growth rate. So a few days ago, that Xi Jinping said, turn from high growth rate to a mid-high speed growth rate. So that is called. But 7% to Korea is still very high. But to China, I think it's at least from a double-digit growth rate to 7. the question is, I think, is why we should have this mid-high speed, because the 18th Party Congress already decided that is we turn to a new development mode. This new development mode supported by, I think, three legs. One is that internal demand-led growth. So we have to mobilize the internal demand rather than just too highly rely on export. Then China already the #1 exporter, so you cannot, produce more for the world market, and so and also this too high export dependent is make Chinese economy that's very vulnerable. And Korea has a very high dependency on export, but compared to China, it's a so large economy, it really cannot afford to have such a high dependency on export. The second leg is they called it the sustainable and green economy. Green is so important. Now, it's really few people expect suddenly that's smog, and usually only concentrate on some big cities, but now spread all over China. We have no clear water, no clear air, the whole over the country. So you have to change the way. So turn to the green and sustainable. And third one, that is the market-led, market-based. So from government-led to market. This Korea also experienced that this kind of period of transition, and also turn to a mixed ownership economy, reform of state-owned. So the reform of state-owned, the first step is push them onto the market, play at the compete with other sectors. But now they change the ownership. So we invite the private sector to be, as the owner of the state-owned. So create a mixed economy, market-led. So the question is whether it is possible to support this so-called mid-high speed growth rate for next 10 or 15 years. There's a lot of debate, and I think it's possible. And some analysts said even you consider Chinese economic growth, it's low quality, but usually you have to deduct 2%. That is still 4 to 5%. It's still okay. So I think the potential, the supporting factors, one, that is still potential for developing as a developing economy. Still a lot of base areas need to develop. And if you travel to China, you can realize. Later I will talk about that. Second supporting factor, that is new reform and opening. And we call this to the second stage of reform and opening, and experiment in Shanghai, free trade zone. And the two key areas, one is largely reduce government direct management of the economy. So let the market, as I mentioned, let the market play the major role. The second, comprehensive high-level opening and to the outside. So experimented after 1 year, and then they found it's 21 areas which now were experimented in Shanghai, can extend to all over China. So this is deepening the reform. And the third sector, that is urbanization, and Li Keqiang called it the new dynamic supporting area. We expect, for instance, in the next 10 to 15 years, there are about 300 million people move from rural to urban area. So itself is really a big force and they change the way of life and change the way of the, of the consumption, and also created urban constructions. All this happened. So that's very, very strong supporting factor. The fourth area, that is infrastructure. And infrastructure, the highway, the new high-speed, railways, all this, continue to develop very fast. Subways in all the cities. So infrastructure will continue to be one of the most dynamic sector in the future. The fourth, the fifth is the new sectors, the new energy and new technological areas, especially the service sector. The service sector will play a more important role. Now it's still about 45%. So if raise the level to 60% itself, it's a very dynamic sector. Also, I think why I put it the rule of law, that's now just a central party committee passed a document and built the country of rule of law. So if you want to, let the market market-based, and change the ownership and all of this, you have to rely on the rule of law rather than rule of man or rule of government. So this is very important turning point for Chinese future development. They call on not just call on rule of law, but to set a base, build. So I think generally nobody can project there is no ups and downs, but generally I think still we have another, they called 10 to 15 years golden time. And some economists said that probably China will have no longer to have the labor force, cheap labor force support. But if you consider China transfer to a new stage of development, they do not need such a big size of cheap labor and with low skills. They need higher, with the higher education and skilled labors. So I think that's possible. However, and also we have found the new group of leaders have set up various new strategies. One called the One Belt and One Road strategy, and as a new initiative and grand strategy. This One Belt, that is New Silk Road Belt, and in China's northwest region, extended to Middle East and Europe. And so this belt strategy, for my understanding, and creates a new balance between East and West. Why? Because China is, after opening and reform, China's economic center mostly on the coastal areas. And economically, you need a balance, but also socially, politically. It's so dangerous for China, such a large country with a great, big population in the West, and the West always consider to be very important for China. So this regional disparity creates a challenge or danger to China's future. So the central government tried to balance this kind of imbalance. So through this Western development strategy and encourage the border areas to open, but actually the result is not so encouraging. So now with this new belt, they change that way of thinking, change way of strategy. I call this new mindset for opening. Because suppose you just encourage the Western areas to open to the outside, and the only thing they can do is transfer the goods from east to west and then further to outside. But what is the outside? Central Asia, South Asia, most of them are less developed economies. So if you export more, and one that is, there is limited potential. Another, we already have seen this kind of the problems. The people do not welcome so much Chinese cheap goods flowed into their country. And also, China is opening in the past from a Western area is mainly for the resources and secure China's supply. But that is not the way, it's not sustainable at all. So now the new belt idea that is to create joint development areas through the investment, through the economic cooperation infrastructure, and build that's new industrial areas and so on. So that's we, through this economic corridor and connectivity. So to let the area develop. By this, China can also share this joint development benefit. So also this belt further to Europe is very traditional Chinese, relations, and it's so important for China's security. And Northwest, in the history, used to be unstable area, but now we have the new challenge of terrorism, separatism, and only thing you make them developed it. And so I think that's the idea of the new economic belt. The totally change the way of strategy and way of thinking, and also supported by AIIB. And many questions put on me why China initiated this AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And if you have a grand design strategy, and you need money. So infrastructure, connectivity, you need money. Where comes the money? And all these poor countries have no money. China has a big foreign exchange reserves, so you have to mobilize. And we have no way to use that reserve in the U.S. pocket. So if you establish a financial institution, you can, one is you can put the money into that institution. Another one that is use this institution to mobilize the financing on the financial market. And also this 21st century Marine Silk Road, it's connected the marine area. For my understanding, it's just economic strategy, also political, that to show we use the new approach to cooperate with the related countries. So away from this the old doctrine that is when you become a big power and you dominate the marine area. So I think to some extent the counter strategy to this old model domination, and because that's so many people worried in the future if China becomes stronger, they dominate the marine the areas. So we will open for that cooperation. This cooperation is not, it's China's initiative. It's not China's project. So I try to explain to Southeast Asia people that it's China's initiative. We have to work together. And it's a joint project. Now it seems now have a better understanding from Southeast Asia, from South Asia, and India also show their, the wish to cooperate, and Southeast Asia, even Philippines. We had a high dispute, but a few days ago, and Philippine president committed to cooperate on this, 21st century Marine Silk Road constructions. That first and suppose, this doctrine we established firstly, that is the network of ports, and then design or identify some economic areas, and along this, coast and close to these ports and so on. But there are so many initiatives, and if you see how to answer this, whether Chinese government is suddenly become so ambitious to be a big power. But my explanation is that China tries to be a big power by playing a new role. The new role shows that while supporting the existing system, but also initiating new institutions, like BRICS Bank and SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Bank, AIIB, and just announced this Silk Road Fund and with $40 billion US, and Chiang Mai Initiative Reserve Fund, that's also China's proposal, and AMRO is to be registered as international organization and to play the role to monitor the Asia economic growth and to coordinate macroeconomic policy. And also that's 2 years ago China proposed. And now 10+3 agreed to make AMRO and macroeconomic research office that as a regional body to coordinate and macroeconomic policy for the region. So I think whether China, the question is whether China want to totally change the existing system. I don't think China has ability to change. If you see that's even a little increase of China's share in IMF rejected by the U.S. Congress. So now still you cannot. So it's very difficult. China has no such ability to change the whole system. Adjustment, restructure adjustment would be very slow. But however, we all realize these institutions established after World War II now cannot fit the demand. What is the demand? That is emerging, developing economies. They need big money. And they need their cooperation, financial cooperation. Only the project-oriented cooperation is not enough. They need the finance. And finance, you need the credibility, and you need the institution. So that's why I think, China is so active to promote also this kind of new financial institutions. Yesterday when we discussed, and the question is put whether China will dominate, whether and they can break this the rules of this international market. But I said, if you formalized a joint venture, and then if you see the BRICS as a case, they can discuss, how to coordinate it or affiliate it with these existing institutions. And also the last few days, and APEC become a big issue. I quote Obama's saying, he said, no other country in the world makes so big effort on such an international conference. He really said. But China, why China spends so much money, pay too much attention on this APEC? I think it's for two reasons. One, that is, it's happening in Beijing, China, to show its ability, because the APEC is really in the low end. And we had a BOGO goal, but few people believe that BOGO goal can be realized. And China tried to play a very important role to coordinate. We work really very hard. And the second, I think, for China itself, to show that China's new leaders' confidence, and to show that China will create APEC Blue, and by the efforts, and let's show some determinations. And I think a big achievement, for instance, China announced this $10 million contribution to support APEC activity, and committed to 1,500 training and for APEC, and also more importantly, and we agreed on this FTA as a mainstream roadmap towards the open and cooperated Asia Pacific. So, but nobody knows how difficult this FTA. However, we designate or determine that it's new approach to realize our APEC dream at the beginning, that is create an integrated, open, corporate Asia Pacific. Otherwise, we have TPP, we have RCEP, we have the other bilateral, trilaterals. There is no way to coordinate. So FTAP is the only way, probably. But it's a long road, because when we try to coordinate, there are great differences on how to, push this right direction. And because the TPP is just on the way, and U.S. hope that TPP could be a sole model for the future of Asia Pacific, so does not very much support the FTAP at this moment, though FTAP was an idea of U.S. and George Bush pushed it in 2006. But also I think another, that is whether we start, because APEC made so many great ideas. Whether this FTAP, like the others in the past, and then just a consensus, no action. So China worked very hard, try to get something in real, and then we try to start this feasibility study after this meeting. But again, it's some members, especially U.S. and Japan, they does not like this feasibility word. Feasibility means already agreed, and then it's almost a fact. You just study how to implement. But finally, we agreed on word strategic studies. But however, and the expert groups have to put forward the reports by the end of the 2016, and to tell the officials how to promote. So that's why I think Asia Pacific to China is very important. To us also very important. The China Dream also become a big word, and that's put forward by Xi Jinping. And also many questions about what about China's dream? Specifically, the China's dream, very clear. We have two steps made by Deng Xiaoping. 2020, to build China as an overall well-being society. 2020. So that's why Xi Jinping put forward this China Dream, because it's just in his term. He have to realize 2020 goal. The second step is 2050. That is turn China into an advanced country. So China's dream become a motive to deepen reform and opening. Immediate question, also Xi Jinping replied, that is middle income trap, whether China can overcome. And Korea overcome, and Taiwan overcome, and very few, Singapore overcome, but few countries in the world have overcome this middle income trap, and after developed economies. So whether such a big country can overcome. I calculated if China can succeed to keep this 7 growth rate by 2020 or at least 2025, and per capita GDP will reach about $13,000 US dollars. So that's the standard for overcoming this middle income trap. So if that dream realized, I think it's really a great progress and achievement for global economy. And because all the middle income trap successful stories happen in Asia. But again, in Asia, but China is different. It's a big country. In the past, it's all the, except Japan. Japan is advanced in the past. It just recovered back. But the other latecomers, and it's really a special case. And Xi Jinping said, we had a confidence, but he said, to make the room, he said, I don't know how long, how to realize, but however, China could overcome this middle income trap. And also, I think one very important thing, if you secure China's new strategy, one, I think, very important I think, a factor that is how to handle this complex, conflicting relationships. And the foremost important thing, how to handle China-U.S. new power relations. And will never happen such a kind of a rising existing power who could coordinate and cooperate. And we had a war in the history. But now, and I call it China-U.S. try to make the history if they succeed. And until now, I think it's okay. Because you can't imagine that two countries do the same thing. And when I visited the United States, and my American friend asked me, if you want to build a new power relationship, why not China always, not support U.S. policies? I said, that's not the actually real meaning for new power relationship. New power relationship try to avoid this confrontation and seek any possibility to cooperate. That does not necessarily we do the same thing, because you are existing power and we are the emerging power. So we have great differences, but we try to overcome these differences. And if you see the recent days, Obama in Beijing, and they made many agreements. So when they come together, they find many commons which they can communicate, which can do together. Communicate is very important. And in the past, as rising power and existing power, they had no way of communication. Now there are 4 kinds of strategic dialogues, and there are hundreds of meetings between the ministries and so on. So I think, and also managing the conflict on South China Sea. And people worried about this South China Sea, but we had, I think the worst year is the last year. And we had the really a challengeable situation and with Vietnam, with Philippines. But now you come and with the patience, and now is the cool down. In this East Asia Summit, and South China Sea has not become a big issue. And then Philippine president also committed, we found a way on how to handle our problems. And China, Vietnam now, they sit down together and try to find the commons to avoid this, the big confrontation. China also, this 21st Marine Silk Road strategy is to extend the cooperation rather than confrontation. And China-Japan relations, it's they shake hands, but everybody understands it's not easy. And immediately after this shaking hand, and then Japan foreign minister said that's 4 basic principles. There's no any legal base, so it's not necessary to insist. So, but Abe again in Myanmar, that committed to Chinese Prime Minister said we'll follow that 4 principles. That's Japanese politics, but it's. I think, however, we moved to the right direction, and people worried about the Diaoyu Island war and and then some accidents. But I think from both sides understand the danger, so they try to move the way forward. The Northeast Asia is so complex, unique. I think Chinese policymakers well understand where they need and how to handle the relations. China-Japan relations is so important. And the general peaceful environment, avoiding confrontation, avoiding a war. And that is, I think, the key factor for China to realize its dream. I think Northeast Asia is a challenge. I think it's a test for China, the role, and also for China's peaceful environment. China initiated this 6-party talks, but now it's blocked. But I think it's still some hope there. But because this accumulated several decades problem, we have to be patient. But when I say patience in South Korea, people always criticize me. We cannot to be patient because the danger every day, and you are so close. But I say, but the foremost thing is we prevent from any kind of a possible to have a war, and then find a solution. And that's the only thing we can do. We have to handle it carefully and gradually. Like or not, Northeast Asia is a political system, is a state you have to deal with. And then you have to create something which get North Korea to be in. So yesterday we discussed a possibility to launch a Northeast Asia dialogue framework, and along with this, so all separate, that's with the CJK. Now all you create in the future, and 3+3 with North Korea, Russia, Mongolia. So however, you have to find a way how to get it in. And then once you get it in, and you can change the minds and change the relationship. So I stop here for this general comment on the new strategy. Now quickly turn to FTA, China-Korea FTA. I think, as mentioned by Dr. Sakong, that it's really a big thing for not just for our two countries, also for the region. I think most important thing is this big change of the regional trade structure in Northeast Asia. Already happened, but we have to create a new through this FTA. What is the grand change? If you see, now one grand change is when China started to opening and reform, and China's market dependency on Japan is 18.7% on the top. Now what happened last year? And China's market dependency on Japan is 7.8%. And Japan's market dependency on China is 18.3%. So there's a big overturn of this market relationship of the trade. What is another big happening? That is China-Korea relationship. China-Korea trade, and based on the investment, and continue to grow, almost close to China-Japan trade. I think now last year only $30 billion gap, but this year continue to reduce. Next year, if the trend continue, I think China-Korea trade exceed China-Japan trade. It's a very big, structural change. And how to sustain such kind of China-Korea economic relationship? We have to find a new way. That is, in the past, China-Korea, this continue growing trend rely on Korea investment into China. China as a producer. So this gap now, for many reasons, this cannot continue. We have to formulate a new model, new structure, to continue to support such kind of growing trend. So we have to new restructuring, new dynamic feature based on the open economic area. I call this China, Korea have to create an open economic area rather than just an open market. Why? In the past, we more work on this manufacturing industries. As I mentioned, China will change. China will no longer rely on this export-oriented. And China will turn to the more, technological-oriented. So there is a direct conflict between the two old structures. So they have to create a new, and working together, for instance, new areas, and create more joint ventures, and more important, I think, the service sector as a new frontier. So we cannot continue, this kind of manufacturing-based the relationship. And consider China as a big country, we had a study, for instance, only this medical sector can provide enough and dynamic supporting force for China-Korea new relationship. And Korea now is just not for women, for the aging, for the whole population. So it's create a new area. That's a fit China's new direction. That is developing the service sector as the main supporting factors for future economic. So we have to change the structure. That is not necessarily the opportunities end. So many people here worried about this closing gap between the two countries and seems no future. But we have to develop the new areas. And also I think very important for Korea have to how to accommodate China's new strategy I described just now as a partner. You know, like AIIB, if you participate, you can be engaged all this infrastructure related to projects, and also the others. I understand that Korea has a Euro-Asia initiative, and we had a seminar in Beijing and to discuss how to link the Korean initiative, your initiative to the West, and China's new Silk Road belt to the West. So we have the same direction. And as Euro-Asia initiative is focusing on infrastructure and connectivity. So actually we can link it together. But also I think it's more important is we have to think beyond FTA. So FTA is just a part of the story. And for instance, connectivity is a new area. And also, FTA is just focusing more on the liberalization. Liberalization have the benefit that create competition, efficiency, and the market access. But on the other hand, you have also created problems. Who benefit most? There is a loser and a winner. So the two countries have to think about beyond FTA for the future economic relations. To the regional, I think to China, this China-Korea FTA, somebody called it not a complete high-level FTA, because we just signed a basic agreement. That means we only agreed on the basic, most important things. We leave some areas for future negotiation. Actually, it's a gradual process. We committed immediately signing the agreement. We continue to negotiate the liberalization of investment and service based on the negative list and pre-national treatment two principles. So China has not committed any, only committed to the United States to consider that these two principles in BIT negotiation. Consider. But now China, Korea agreed to adopt these principles and for further to continue their negotiation to liberalize that investment and service sector. I think for China is to create a model that is Korea is the first country who competitive, mid-large-sized, consider though Korea consider still a developing country in WTO, but actually is already an advanced economy. So it's just China's first case to negotiate FTA. Before that, we only conclude two FTAs with developed economies. One is New Zealand, another is Switzerland, all small countries. Korea is the first one. So we set a common model that we agreed on the basic, most important things, but we continue to negotiate the most difficult things. I think it's different from Korea, American FTA, different from. Also, I think the significance probably set some experience for future CJK FTA. We can't expect once for all complete, comprehensive FTA. Also, probably set some experience for RCEP negotiation. we can't expect RCEP 16 countries to complete a very high level comprehensive one. So I think you know, it has some significance for the region, and for China, for the region, and also for Korea, how to deal with this, you know, less developed, all developing economies in the other regions. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very comprehensive, the illustrating presentation on China's new growth strategy and China-Korea, the FTA. I don't think I need to summarize what he's just said, but he said so many things, and then he put so many things on the table for discussion. So with this, I would like to invite the comments or questions from the floor. Yes, Mr. Hong, and then Dunkirk, please. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chiang. I would like to raise the question about so-called middle income trap. You have said here China is quite confident on overcome of this trap. But there are so many economists who are worrying about that and pointing about middle income trap overcome as China's present situation. Without strong reform and the restructuring is very apt to fall in, they are worrying about. So we know that China is promoting in these directions. But would you give us some more detailed direction with which China's government now promoting for overcome of this situation? And I'm even myself quite confident. But would you give us some more detailed directions with which you are now promoting? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, why don't you collect a few more? As Dunkirk, senior U.S. journalist.
Well, thank you for letting me ask a question. I just am curious about what you really think of TPP. Are there suggestions that this is really an anti-China alliance, or is there a chance that China might actually join TPP? And what would you think of Korea joining TPP in light of the China-Korea FTA? If you could just expand a little on what you really think of TPP. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, now with these two questions, yes.
I think it's to overcome middle income trap. The foremost important thing to continue to support economic growth, are stable, and as I mentioned, there's mid-high level growth rate. That's if you sustain for 7%, that's every 10 years you have a double of GDP size. So even you lower to, for instance, after 10 years, you lower to 5 and 6 or 5%. So by 2025, and it's still possible. Another one, if you know GDP in U.S. dollar is you know it's another story. If consider Chinese renminbi, we appreciate it's not so difficult to realize. So I think it's foremost the thing. If, as I mentioned, you have to do this in the 3 legs, you know, new model. That is domestic demand led. It is possible because domestic demand led. Once you reach some kind of income level, and then you know, that's consumption, internal consumption will increase. Of course, it's supported by other factors. For instance, the government now try to increase the low-level, low-income groups' income and so on. And urbanization itself also is a factor to raise the income level of the population, and also, as I mentioned, this market-based rule of law development strategy. After this strong government management, in China also state-owned enterprises play the very important role. Now you move to a mixed economy and mobilize the social capitals to be in these state-owned enterprises, and also government are highly reduced. Only in, for instance, experiment, not just experimented in Shanghai, but at the same time is doing at a top level in all of the countries. Within the past year, 43% of this government government direct intervention for alliance of projects reduced. So this trend, I think, is continue. So I think it's possible. That's why I said Xi Jinping has not made a specific commitment. He said, however, China could ever come, but it depends on when and how. So it's an open question, but it seems possible. If you see Latin America, the other areas, so one negative impact for their middle-income tribe is their growth rate is not stable. And some, come to a very low period of time. And then China, as a developing countries, I said, the first one is potential and the large areas for develop and secured by the stable political transition. And it's possible, I think. And second question, TPP. It's really the beginning when U.S. announced this as TPP is a big surprise and put a big high alert for policymakers. They worry some at the beginning as China was excluded. So there are also the other kind of media and the Chinese leaders never said such it's against China. So later, after the careful study and watching, that we realized TPP is a fact. China cannot stop it. And so we just take a wait and see attitude. And let's see. But TPP, fortunately, TPP was not as, as smooth as expected. So now there are, the process. And whether China will participate, I don't think now it's a clear story. China has not made decision to participate. It's possible. I think just possible. But on the other hand, China tried to promote the FTA as a coordinated strategy. China put great emphasis first on RCEP negotiation. On this RCEP negotiation, I think it's very significant. I don't think TPP is the sole model for Asia Pacific. You may, invite, attract more economies to be in, but you cannot cover all of Asia Pacific. Or otherwise, you change the model because it's high-level, comprehensive, complete liberalization, and behind border so much complex issues. I don't think it's so many people, so many economies can fit that. So China that's why China is on the trial base to negotiate BIT with the U.S. as a trial experiment to see how to handle this complex issue. Actually, BIT now negotiation is go much beyond the traditional BIT. It's cover more. There's a lot of trade and FTA-related issues now will covered into this BIT negotiation. Now it's negotiation also start BIT with the EU. So they see how to handle this most important and transition period. So I think that's a current situation for China. Consider Korea's participation. I think we all aware and just a time and Korea will participate. But one worrisome is yesterday during our seminar, once, Japan is in TPP, and if Korea participate, and CJ, how about CJK? Whether Korea and Japan still have the interest, and I'll put CJK on the higher agenda, or TPP first and then the others later. So also RCEP, whether, Korea and Japan have this high interest to promote the RCEP as a priority, project. So I think that's probably for the East Asia, that's a great concern.
BIT stands for Bilateral Investment Treaty.
Yes.
And the RCEP is a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It's another region-wide the FTA or partnership. Okay, Professor Kim, please.
Yes, I'm Professor Kim of Sungkyunkwan University. I have two questions. One, I wonder if there's any discrepancy or disagreement between the Chinese people, ordinary business people, and the intellectuals with respect to the Korea-China FTA. Are they all, most of them happy or pleased to, see this completion of the, or conclusion of the KCFTA pact? Now, the second question is, do you foresee that China will turn into the yuan zone in the future? I mean, do you see it's going to come soon? How soon? Thank you.
Okay, yes, Chairman Zhou.
Thank you, Chairman Zhou. I have two questions. The first one you did not, of course, touched upon at all. In regard to Arctic Council, in addition to the 7 permanent membership to the Council, China, Korea, Japan, and Singapore have gained permanent observer status. In addition to gaining a new sea route, I would be interested in knowing whether China has any other interest in your activities in the Council. That would be the first question.
I can't understand.
This is the Arctic Council, all right.
Huh?
Security Council.
Oh.
Okay. Arctic
Yes.
Council. The second question.
Security. UN. Is it?
Arctic Council? Wait a minute. The second question is on the.
I don't know very well.
Yeah. What?
North
Pole.
Yes.
Okay, not
Okay.
the Council.
The second question is in regard to AIIB. China has pledged 50% of the initial the asset creation, or has put in the 50% of the initial investment. I'll be interested in knowing your how would you want the management? Are you interested in the management control? This is in the business language. The extent and how you really want to run the bank. And that would be my second question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. The first question about this people and business community to FTA. I think it's generally in China, they think the two countries should have a FTA, very strong support. But problem is most people, they think since we have trade imbalance, then we should have more market access. That means export more goods to Korea, and also investment, and China has limited. So that's why I call this economic area. I try to tell the people in China, you do not expect too much export to Korea because of a limited market. And so the most important thing for the two countries to open the areas and let the business to find, reformulate their relationship, change it from this, Korea investment-led the corporations. So I think that probably some problems in the future when they, for instance, find still difficult to export more to Korean market and investment more to Korean market, and so we have to let the people understand what's a real dimension and for the FTA. So that's why also I called it beyond FTA thinking, rather than just liberalization market. And so Korea is a mid-level economy, and the mid-market is not a big potential market to export, more. About the yuan zone, I think probably few people think about in the near future. Now what China is doing is on the trial base to make yuan as a confidential currency and on a bilateral base, and then set a foundation for the future for yuan to be a full convertible currency. And then I don't know, whether yuan become or not. If you see Japan's, it depends on Chinese economy, and also I think China's financial capacity, whether, to provide that trust and confidential factor for the financial market. If you see Japan's experience, try hard to make Japanese yen as internationalized currency, it has not succeeded at all. Maybe Chinese currency is different, but only few people they expect that in the long future, at least the yuan become one of the major currency parallel to the US dollar. That's most possible, probably future, but nobody expect to replace US dollar. Concerning, I think the North Pole issue, I'm not familiar with this issue, so I will probably can't. Concerning AIIB, I think it's because currently, why China committed 50%? Because the size is $100,000. And then if China failed to provide enough capital, initial capital, that cannot work at all. So I think if other large economies participate in the future, it's naturally China will reduce its share. I don't think that's a principle that China insists to have a half of that. And even now, China committed half, and then still you have the difficulty for the other small, countries who can provide the capital. So we still have found a way. For instance, if Japan joined, and then the China's share surely will. If Korea, for the management, it's really a great concern. That's also U.S. Argument whether you can follow the international standards, and so I think it should be, but infrastructure investment, the fund is different from the normal, credit. So you have to have careful assessment, and also have a guaranteed approach. And guarantee, I think, is the most difficult thing in the future. It's not the project; it's a guarantee. How to guarantee this the loans provided to the long infrastructure projects. So I think I should be very cautious and very high standard. I think probably high standard, very high standard, because this infrastructure investment is has a high risk. So I don't think the management should be a problem. There are so many experiences. And concerning the relation between AIIB and ADB, China has, and also the group announced as a supplement to ADB, because ADB, one is capital very limited. The second, ADB has no capacity to finance the infrastructure. It's only provide very limited small money for projection rather than for investment. So we really need some, as I mentioned, these post-Second World War financial institutions, and when we rely on the market, the private sector, the banks, but that's not enough. Private sector will not eagerly to invest in infrastructure. So we really need official government-based supported behind financial institutions. That's the idea. I participate some of the discussions for preparation. We also, China has some differences. For instance, whether we start from a fund, infrastructure fund, and now China announced a separate Silk Economic Belt Fund. It's $40 billion US. That's especially for that area. But if you launch an Asia Infrastructure Fund, the future difficulty is that it's difficult to raise a fund on the market, the confidence. So if you have a bank, it's well managed and confidential, and then probably it's easier to raise a fund on the financial market and also cooperate with the private sector. So actually, that's why I think this bank in the future also have to be a PPP model. They find a way how to cooperate with the private capital, I think. So I don't think management is a big issue. They will seriously discuss like a BRICS bank, and people also worried about. But now they find a way how to share this responsibility and then move toward a real international financial organization. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to make one comment on this issue, because I've been taking very the strong position on this issue publicly. It's very good to know that Chinese authority think this AIIB, which would be supplementary to existing multilateral institutions, and you said it's always a support the existing multilateral institutions. So I think that is very important point. It shouldn't be the competitive the organization against the existing multilateral institutions. In reality, I don't think that will really work. And if AIIB to be a supplementary the organization to existing multilateral institutions, particularly the World Bank and the ADB, then I think this AIIB, the mode of operation should be at least consistent with these principles and modus operation of existing institutions, and should have a good working relationship. And if that is the case, then Korea, I think, of course, should join. For that matter, I would think that the U.S. should join as well, and the U.S. should be invited, as the U.S. participate in ADB, and this the AIIB's its own governance system, I think, should be more transparent, and so that this will be operated based on really clear and transparent
and a few words, and also
yeah.
World Bank has publicly announced they support the AIIB.
Yeah,
And also, I think AIB will invite the World Bank to be involved. And also announce that there is not a limitation for any country, open for all countries to participate in the future.
So that's why I thought that any country, including United States, to discourage other countries to join. I would rather encourage them to join and then make the institution more competitive with multilateral existing institution, rather than, because it's a reality, and I think it is important to make this. Banks certainly has roles to play, so let's make the institution more compatible with existing institutions, and a country like Korea can play the role, I think, and so we should actively participate, provided the institution will be supplementary to the existing institution. Okay, as
thank you, Dr. Chang, for
leading international lawyers in Korea.
Your presentation. When I got the notice about this morning seminar, China's new economic strategy and the Korea-China FTA, my personal interest was to hear more about the Korea-China FTA part. But your presentation made it the Korea-China FTA almost like a side footnote. But in a way, having heard your presentation, I can understand why, because you have this, China has a big economic strategy for the next at least 15 years to 2030. And it's good to understand that and also to see where Korea-China FTA fits in. So the way I understand this FTA, there are tariff reductions that have been agreed upon and announced some over the next 20 years, some going to effect immediately. But it's also good to hear that you have this agreement on principle about the service sector and the investment, and that there will be further negotiations for liberalization based upon negative list approach and national treatment. And that is the first time actually China has agreed to that approach specifically with a country. So I'm glad that even though the Korea-China FTA is not as high a level FTA as some had hoped, but there are realities. It takes two parties to come to an agreement, and China has its own needs. But it is important for Korea, as the country that's so close to China physically and has a very large trading relationship. And the thing that has been difficult for many of the Korean businesses are in the non-tariff barriers area, including the services sector. So to have this commitment to further negotiations on this very important area is very good. And also Korea has a precedent in the Korea-India CEPA to start with a low-level agreement and then continuously move on to a higher level. So I know that China has a challenge of overcoming the middle income trap, and I wish you the best, because I think the better you do, the better Korea will do. And Korea has benefited a lot over the last 10, 15 years from China's growth, and I think our mutual prosperity is really linked so closely. So I wish you the best, and thank you for your presentation.
Would you like to respond to it?
Actually, Mr. Sakon's email asked me whatever you talk about. And now the first put on the China's new economic strategy, I thought let's give people to know about China. And also another factor is, FTA. I have not read. I participate some pre-discussions, and during the process also I participate, but I don't know the final that text. Whether I have not read, so I cannot give a very specific long speech about that. So that's why reason from Next time it will come when I have more knowledge about that. However, I think it's two most important significances. One that is for China is a trial base, and for Korea also, I think, how to negotiate with the developing large economy, and then only accept this gradual process. And otherwise, as you know, China, Korea, FTA lasted for 10 years from the first call and then negotiated, almost blocked by many factors, and the two leaders make a political commitment and push it to go. That's why I think sign this basic, rather than sign a complete. And so that's I think, some experience. The second one that, as I said, we all realize we have to formulate a new relationship because the old model, old structure cannot continue. And so we have to find a new approach, especially the new sectors, and give the confidence of the business to find the new sectors. We had several seminars recently in Beijing, how to explore this FTA, for instance, provide new opportunities for business away from this traditional thinking of produce more and export more and this kind of model. So that's let's see how business to use this new opportunity to see that.
Okay, with this, we have to let him go. In fact, I forced him to have this opportunity to share his views this morning. Actually, as he said, originally the flight was scheduled at 9 o'clock, but it's changed the flight. So we're very fortunate to have him to enlighten us overall Chinese growth strategy and how Chinese policymakers and the leaders see their own economy and the economic future. Because Mr. Zhang, I'm sure, he presented his views, but he reflected many of the leaders' thinking and thoughts. So it's very, very helpful to understand how Chinese leaders see its own future and the Asian integration. In that context, he talked about our FTA, which is again important. I'm sure it will open as a new horizon for two countries' economic relationship. And it is only low level, the FTA at the beginning, but I'm sure it will improve on. So we had a good start. Well, with this, we have to let him go, and we have to bring him back next time. Next time, maybe we'll make a plan ahead rather than force him to stay. Okay, please join me in thanking him.
Thank you.